All right, listeners, buckle up. We're about to take a deep dive into some seriously mind-bending material.
Oh, this is going to be good. I can already tell.
You guys sent in this excerpt from The Climate Crisis is Solved, Breaking Free from Linear Thinking to Embrace Our Exponential Future. And I have to say, the title alone is a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, it definitely grabs your attention, doesn't it?
The author seems to believe that, at least when it comes to the technology, we've already got the solutions to tackle climate change.
What I find fascinating is the argument that it's our mindset that's actually the biggest roadblock.
Ah, okay, so how we think about the problem is the problem.
Exactly. We're so accustomed to thinking in straight lines, linear progress, that we completely miss the potential of exponential growth, especially when it comes to finding solutions.
That's a really interesting point. It's like we're standing right in front of the answers, but we're wearing blinders so we can't see them.
It's a good analogy. The author actually uses this analogy about folding a piece of paper to reach the moon.
Oh, I think I've heard that one before. Something about how many times you can fold a piece of paper.
Yeah, it's a classic way to illustrate this concept. Theoretically, if you could fold a regular sheet of paper in half 42 times, it would reach all the way to the moon.
Wow, 42 times. I can barely fold a piece of paper in half more than, like, 6 or 7 times.
Uh-huh, right. In reality, you can't physically fold a piece of paper that many times. But the analogy does a great job of showing how our brains just aren't wired to grasp the power of exponential growth. We tend to think in a very linear, step-by-step way.
We assume if something's growing, it's growing at a steady, predictable rate, but that's not always the case.
Exactly. And because of that, we often underestimate how rapidly these technologies can advance and disrupt entire industries. It's not a gradual shift, it's a sudden and dramatic leap forward.
I think we've all had those moments where we're caught off guard by how quickly something changed, right? Like smartphones, remember when those first came out?
Mm,
Or streaming services completely taking over the entertainment industry. That's exponential growth in action.
absolutely. Those are perfect examples. And the author is arguing that the same thing is happening right now with climate solutions.
Okay, I'll admit I'm a little skeptical, but also super curious. What about you? Are you buying this argument so far?
Well, it definitely raises some important questions. What are we missing because of our linear mindset? For instance, take precision fermentation. This tech has the potential to completely revolutionize food production as we know it.
Okay, now this one is pretty mind-blowing. We're talking about creating meat and dairy products without actually nating animals.
Right. No farms, no livestock.
All thanks to microorganisms. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It might sound futuristic, but the science is real, and the progress being made is incredible. One of the most striking things is how drastically the cost has come down.
Okay, so how much did this cost, like back in the day?
Well, back in 2000, it cost about $1 million to produce a single kilogram of protein through precision fermentation.
$1 million for a kilo of protein? That's insane.
It is a stark contrast to where we are now. By 2020, that cost had plummeted to around $100 per kilogram, and projections show that it could drop to $10 or even less by 2025.
Wow, that's a game changer. But even if it's cheaper and better for the planet, do you really think people will be open to eating meat and dairy made in a lab?
That's a good question. I think consumer acceptance is definitely a factor.
Hmm.
But if it tastes good, it's affordable, and it's easy to find, people might be more open to it than we think, especially as awareness grows about the environmental and ethical concerns surrounding traditional agriculture.
That's true. It's kind of like how plant-based milk alternatives have become so popular. It's not just about the environment anymore, it's about having options.
Right, exactly. This could have huge implications for the future of farming as a whole.
It's a fascinating dilemma, and one that we might have to face sooner than we think. But it's not just food production that's undergoing a radical transformation. The author also talks about the advancements in renewable energy.
Of course. That's another area where we're seeing remarkable progress. The cost of solar and wind power has absolutely plummeted over the past few decades.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that solar panels are becoming more and more common. But how much cheaper are we talking about, like compared to, say, fossil fuels?
We're talking about a near 100% drop in the price of solar energy since 1976.
Wow, that's practically free energy at this point. And it's not just about cost, right? The capacity is growing, too.
Exactly. We're seeing massive solar and wind farms popping up all over the world. But there's still this issue of intermittency. What happens when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing? How do we deal with that?
That's a good point. It's not always sunny and breezy, unfortunately.
Well, that's where energy storage comes in. And this is another area where we're seeing incredible progress. The cost of batteries, particularly lithium-ion batteries, has decreased by a whopping 89% just between 2010 and 2020. This means storing energy generated from these renewable sources is becoming more efficient and cost-effective, addressing that intermittency problem.
So we can capture all this clean energy and store it for later use. Does that mean renewables are actually on track to becoming cheaper than fossil fuels? I mean, is that even possible?
It is becoming a reality in a lot of places. We're reaching what's called grid parity, the point where renewable energy combined with storage actually becomes cheaper than energy generated from fossil fuels. And it's not just a theory. It's already happening in some parts of the world.
Wow, imagine a world where your energy bill gets cheaper and cleaner at the same time. I think a lot of people would be on board with that. But what about transportation? That always seems to be the tricky part. Does this book offer any exponential solutions for that?
It does, and this one's pretty fascinating. The author points to the convergence of two major trends: the rapid advancements in self-driving technology and the increasing affordability and efficiency of electric vehicles.
Okay, so on one hand, you've got companies like Tesla and Waymo making huge strides in self-driving cars, and on the other, you've got the continued drop in battery costs, making electric vehicles more affordable.
You got it. And these two trends are intersecting in a really interesting way.
So we've got better, cheaper electric vehicles and increasingly sophisticated self-driving capabilities. What does that add up to?
It leads to a concept called transportation as a service, or TaaS. Imagine a world where instead of owning a car, you just summon a self-driving electric vehicle whenever you need one. It picks you up, takes you where you need to go, and then it goes on to serve someone else.
No more car payments, no more searching for parking, and a significant reduction in emissions. Sign me up.
Right. It does sound pretty appealing. It has the potential to completely transform our cities and our relationship with transportation. We could see fewer emissions, less traffic congestion, and potentially even more efficient urban planning.
It's a pretty big shift from our current car-centric culture, though. I'm not sure everyone's ready to give up their personal vehicles just yet. Would you be willing to trade in your car for a robotaxi?
It's a good question to think about, but I think the main takeaway here is that these advancements across various fields suggest a future where the climate crisis might actually be addressed.
But, and correct me if I'm wrong, the author is arguing that we're still clinging to these outdated ways of thinking that prevent us from fully embracing these solutions.
That's the core argument, yes.
Yeah.
We're seeing policy changes happening at a snail's pace. Investments are still being poured into industries that are on the verge of becoming obsolete, and city planning is stuck in the 20th century.
So we've got the tech, but we're stuck with a 20th century mindset trying to solve 21st century problems. It seems like we need a serious upgrade in our thinking. How do we break free from this linear thinking trap and really embrace the potential of these exponential solutions? That's what I'm really curious to explore further.
That's a great question, and one that we'll definitely dig into more deeply as we continue our deep dives into this thought-provoking material.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the climate crisis is solved. We were just talking about how our thinking might be the biggest obstacle to solving climate change. I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around. Thinking differently can actually change the world.
It is a big shift in perspective for sure. But the author makes a good point about how our mindset shapes how we see the problem and ultimately the solutions we come up with.
In the first part, we talked about how these emerging technologies have the potential to, well, solve the climate crisis. But I'm still kind of struggling to see how this all fits together. Do you think the author offers any concrete examples of these exponential solutions actually working in the real world?
Absolutely. There are tons of inspiring innovations that are already having a real impact. One that comes to mind is vertical farming. I don't know if you've heard much about it.
Vertical farming, yeah. I've heard the term thrown around, but I'm not sure I fully grasp what it is. I picture, like, skyscrapers filled with plants, but I'm guessing it's a bit more complex than that.
It is a bit more complex, but you're not far off with that image. Vertical farms are essentially buildings, often multi-story buildings, designed specifically for growing crops indoors. And they're usually located in urban areas.
Okay, so you're literally bringing the farm to the city. But why? What's the advantage of growing food inside a building?
Well, for starters, vertical farms can produce a lot more food per square foot than traditional agriculture. And they do it while using way less water and pesticides. Plus, because they're right there in the city, You eliminate all the transportation costs and emissions associated with getting food from rural farms to urban centers.
Okay, I see. So it's about efficiency, sustainability, and reducing the carbon footprint of our food system.
Exactly. It's a pretty ingenious way to address a lot of the challenges we face with our current food system.
Makes sense. But I'm curious about what types of food can be grown in these vertical farms. Can you grow everything in there? Like, are we talking about vertical farms growing wheat and corn?
Well, not everything. They're particularly well suited for growing leafy greens like lettuce and spinach, as well as herbs and some fruits and vegetables.
So you could potentially walk into a grocery store and buy fresh produce that was grown just a few blocks away in a vertical farm. That's a pretty cool concept. But is this a realistic solution for the masses, or is it just a fancy, expensive option for now?
Right now, it can be a bit more expensive than traditional agriculture. But as the technology improves and becomes more widely adopted, those costs will likely come down. I think we could reach a point where vertical farming becomes a real alternative, especially as concerns about climate change and food security continue to grow.
It's definitely a fascinating idea to think about. It's like we're on the cusp of a whole new way of producing food. But speaking of reshaping industries, the author also dives into the progress being made in carbon capture technologies, right? I feel like that's a big piece of the puzzle when it comes to addressing climate change. Can you give us a quick rundown of how that actually works?
Sure, carbon capture and storage, or CCS for short, is all about trapping carbon dioxide emissions from those big polluters like power plants and industrial facilities before they get released into the atmosphere.
So instead of all that CO2 going up into the air and contributing to the greenhouse effect, we capture it and store it somewhere safe. But where exactly does it go?
There are actually a few different ways to capture and store CO2. Some involve capturing it right from the source, like the smokestacks at power plants. Others involve capturing it directly from the air, and then once it's captured, it can be stored underground in these geological formations or even used to make stuff, which is pretty cool.
Wait, you can capture CO2 directly from the air? That sounds incredibly futuristic to me. Is that technology even feasible on a large scale?
It sounds like science fiction, but it's real. There are companies developing these technologies that act like giant air filters, basically sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere. Now, it's still in the early stages, but it has enormous potential.
It's amazing to think that we might be able to reverse some of the damage we've already done. But I have to ask, what are the downsides? What's holding us back from implementing these technologies on a massive scale? I imagine it's probably super expensive.
You're right, cost is a big hurdle. Carbon capture can be very energy intensive and expensive. But just like with a lot of these exponential technologies, as research and development continues, the costs are coming down. So as these technologies become more efficient and affordable, we could see a huge increase in their deployment.
It's interesting to see this pattern emerging where these groundbreaking technologies are becoming more efficient and more affordable, making them more and more viable. It's like a snowball effect.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of investing in these innovations and supporting the research and development that drives them forward. It's about thinking long-term and recognizing the potential these technologies have to fundamentally change the game.
I'm starting to see the author's point about needing a shift in our thinking. It's not enough to just tinker around the edges, making small, incremental improvements. We need to embrace these bold, game-changing solutions that might have seemed impossible a few years ago.
Exactly. We need to think bigger, bolder, more creatively. We can't solve a challenge as complex as climate change by sticking to our old linear ways of thinking. We need to embrace the possibilities of an exponential future.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into The Climate Crisis is Solved. We've covered some pretty groundbreaking stuff, haven't we? Precision fermentation, vertical farming, carbon capture, self-driving electric vehicles. It's all pretty amazing.
It really is a fascinating time to be alive, isn't it? We're witnessing such a rapid pace of innovation, and it has the potential to completely transform the world as we know it.
Exactly. And that brings us to what I think is the most intriguing part of this book, the idea that this whole shift from linear to exponential thinking isn't just about technology. It's about, well, it's almost like a shift in consciousness.
I think you're right on the money there. The author is making a case for a fundamental shift in our worldview, a change in how we see the world and our place in it.
In the first two parts, we focused a lot on these incredible technologies and how they could potentially solve the climate crisis. But now I'm curious about the bigger picture. How does this shift in thinking impact us on a deeper level?
Well, I think the key here is to understand that our current linear mindset is so ingrained in our culture, our institutions, it's practically in our DNA. It's not just about how we think about technology, it's about how we see progress, how we view resources, how we relate to each other. It's deeply embedded in our values and beliefs.
So it's not just about adopting new gadgets and inventions, it's about questioning some of the most basic assumptions we have about the world and what's possible.
Exactly. For centuries, our societies have operated under this assumption of linear progress, slow, steady, predictable growth. But in an exponential world where change happens at an accelerating rate, that old model just doesn't work anymore. It's like trying to sail a speedboat with a set of oars.
I love that analogy. It really paints a vivid picture of the mismatch between our current thinking and the rapidly changing world around us. So, how do we make that shift? How do we adapt to this faster, more unpredictable reality?
One of the biggest changes the author emphasizes is a shift away from a scarcity mindset towards an abundance mindset. In a linear world, resources are seen as finite, and that leads to competition and often conflict. But exponential technologies have the potential to generate abundance in areas where we've always assumed scarcity was inevitable.
Okay, that makes sense. So, instead of this constant struggle over limited resources, we can start to imagine a world where everyone has access to clean energy, nutritious food, comfortable housing, and the things they need to thrive.
Precisely. Think about the potential of renewable energy to provide clean, affordable power to every corner of the globe, or precision fermentation to create a world where food insecurity is a relic of the past. These technologies, they have the power to fundamentally change our relationship with resources and with each other.
It's an incredible shift in perspective, isn't it? From scarcity and competition to abundance and collaboration. It's like we're moving from a zero-sum game to a win-win scenario.
It's a paradigm shift, and one that I think is essential if we want to create a future that is both sustainable and just.
And that brings us to what I think is the most mind-blowing idea in this book, the author's suggestion that this shift in thinking actually alters our relationship with time itself. Now, that's a tough one to grasp. How can we change our relationship with something as fundamental as time?
I know it sounds a bit out there, right? But the author argues that in a linear world, we tend to think of time as a straight line, moving from past to present to future in this very predictable way. But in an exponential world, time becomes more fluid, more dynamic. The future arrives much faster than we expect, and those lines between past, present, and future, they start to blur.
So it's not about being swept along by the current of time. It's about becoming more conscious of how we're shaping the future with our choices and actions. It's like we become co-creators of time rather than passive passengers.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it requires us to develop what the author calls an anticipatory mindset, constantly scanning the horizon for new possibilities and being prepared for disruptions and innovations that we can't even imagine right now.
That's both exciting and terrifying at the same time. It requires a lot of trust in ourselves, in humanity, and in our ability to adapt and evolve.
It does, and it's not always easy, but I think it's essential. If we can embrace this exponential mindset, and I mean truly embrace it, it opens up a world of possibilities that we haven't even begun to explore.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into The Climate Crisis is Solved. We've covered a lot of ground, from mind-blowing technologies to a fundamental shift in how we think about the world and our place in it. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. It's been a privilege to explore these ideas with you.
Before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. What would it look like for you to fully embrace this exponential mindset in your own life? How can you challenge your assumptions, get comfortable with uncertainty, and contribute to creating a future that is not just sustainable, but truly thriving? It's a question worth pondering. We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to see the world with fresh eyes.
Until next time, remember, the future is not something that just happens to us. It's something we create together.